So we've got an opportunity this morning to do something. I don't know if y'all know it, but I preach out of my burdens. I do. I have these burdens for the church, for the people of God, and I'm looking in the scripture to say, God, how really do we handle this? And I have this burden for this meanness that happens within the faith. That meanness that is based on our, I've come to find, it's based on our living by law and obedience to God and not by faith and through his grace. We're supposed to be a people of grace. We have been overwhelmed with grace from our God. And it's supposed to spill over into our lives so that we become gracious people, transformed into gracious people. But for whatever reason, and it's historical, it's not just us, it's historical. Where we tend to end up is becoming a people of law. A people of God said it, you better do it. And the reality is that the revelation of God is that God has always given us a this is what you better do, knowing very well we don't do it. And then he provides redemption for us. He provides a saving, a rescuing of us from ourselves. And then we're supposed to live as people who have been saved. The word implies rescued from something. Not changed, in our, how do I say this? In our inability to put together all of this biblical language into their right places, we think that we're supposed to be people who are always repentant. That's the language we use. We're supposed to repent from our sin, turn from it, stop it. That's what it usually means. And what we find is that we can't stop it. As hard as we try, and sometimes as little as we try, we don't stop it. Am I right? And God always provides redemption for those kinds of people. And then he sets us firmly within his redemptive plan as models of his grace. And so, I'm preaching out of that burden. And I've chosen a redemption story. Dave read the end of chapter 4. And I asked him to read the end of chapter 4 because when you know where the book of Ruth is going, when you know what's important to the writer, you don't read into it a love story between Ruth and Boaz. When you see that what comes out of this book is the king of Israel. When you see that, biblically, in the Old Testament, there are essentially three major figures. There's Abraham, there's Moses, and then there's David. Right? New Testament marks Israel's history by those three. And what you see at the end of the book of Ruth is that Obed comes from Ruth and Boaz, and Obed is David's grandfather, the king's grandfather, the one who the Savior would come from. And it lists that genealogy. And right in the middle of it is Ruth. Or so we think. Actually, Ruth is not in there, if y'all notice. Did y'all notice that? In that genealogy, Ruth is not there. It's Naomi. So I want you to keep that in mind as we look at this first chapter in this redemption story. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to lift us from our individualism and our self-centeredness in our relationship to God to see his bigger, grander plan that he is gracious enough to allow us to participate in so that we can have a a more biblical, God-centered vision of life and who we are and what he's doing. It's a way of lifting us out of the muck and mire of life to more godly things, to live more heavenly minded, to live more in what God is doing. So I'm looking at Ruth chapter 1. If you have a device or a Bible, it'd be good if you could look at it. It's going to be behind me, I believe, but I think there's something inherent in seeing it in what you can take home. So you'll be used to seeing it in what you'll have at home. It's in Ruth chapter 1. Now, for the context of this redemption story, there's some things you've got to know that a Jewish reader to whom this was written will hear and see very clearly that you and I, as modern American readers, may not see. That I've got to show you so that you'll have some context. I promise you, as an early Jewish reader of the book of Ruth, there's some things they will see right away. They will recognize it. They'll feel it. It will have an emotional impact on it the moment that they see it and they read it in the text that you and I just may not have. And here is what you need to know. Here's the context. Moab is a place you just don't go to. Y'all need to know that. When Israel was leaving Egypt and they were being led by Moses and they got near the promised land on that eastern side of the Jordan River, Moses and his emissaries went to the king of Moab and asked if we could pass safely through your land. We're not stopping here. We just want safe passage through. And the king of Moab refused. He said, no, you will not be allowed to pass through my land. Now, y'all also need to know they should have let them pass because they're relatives. The Moabites are the descendants of Lot. That's Abraham's nephew. Moab was the son of Lot and his daughter. Y'all heard me right. Of the incestuous relationship between Lot and his daughter. And so Lot named him Moab, and then the people became the people of Moab. And because of those two things, the scripture says, the book of Deuteronomy says very clearly, written right into Israel's law, watch this, that no Moabite would be allowed in the assembly of the Lord. They know it. Ammonite or Moabite, you could not be allowed in the Lord's assembly. They're not welcome here, the Lord said. Now, y'all need to keep this in mind because I love this. I love the Lord for this. That's written in his law. Y'all with me? It's in his law. And this is where we don't always get this thing right. It's in his law that they're not allowed in the assembly. But in the redemptive plan, the Lord's going to choose one. Y'all, I love this story. So are y'all with me? Y'all know it now, right? Y'all got all of that background that you're going to need to have as this story begins. Now, a narrative. This is where I get a bit of time to slow down and to teach some of these things. To understand the meaning of a narrative, you've got to say to yourself, what's the writer trying to tell me? He's going to tell us a story. He's going to narrate some of the story, and then he is going to share some of the dialogue of what happened in the story he's telling. But what we're really trying to come away with is not, oh, what a great story, but why is he telling me that? What's he trying to tell me as a reader? All right, are y'all with me? So we're going to listen very carefully to the writer. We're not going to lose ourselves in the conversation between Naomi and Ruth, right? We're going to listen to why is the writer telling me that they said those things. Out of all of the things he could have told me about what they said and their interaction, he chooses certain things to tell us about what they said because the writer is trying to tell me something. My revelation comes from the writer. Are y'all with me? So we're going to listen very carefully. And listen, the way the writer chooses to structure what he says is also informative. What I'm hoping also is that y'all become students of the Bible through these next 4 weeks. This is how you get meaning. So I want to show you how chapter 1 falls. What does the writer do? How is it structured? It really falls into 3, maybe 4 sections. I say 3 or 4 because the first 2 could be 1, right? But the writer is going to give us the setting in any narrative. You've got to set the setting for people. You can't just jump into the story. You got to tell them how you get there. And so you get this setting beginning at verse number 1 and verse number 2. And then after the setting, and by the way, the setting is going to be Moab. Jews are going to go to Moab. That ought to be informative, right? But watch this. And then beginning at verse number 3, tragedy is going to strike the Jewish family in Moab. Tragedy is going to strike. And then the major section of chapter 1 begins at verse number 6, where Naomi gets ready to go back to Bethlehem, and she's going to have an extended conversation with her daughters-in-law, where the bulk of the meaning is going to come from. Just by sheer volume of verses, that's the important part, because it goes from verse 6 all the way to verse 18. You'll see it from 6 to 18. By the way, there's only 22 verses. But from 6 to 18, the writer slows down and tells us about Naomi having a conversation with her daughters-in-law as she is on her way back to Bethlehem. So where does the writer trying to tell you the importance is coming from? He's trying to tell you it's coming from their conversation. So watch this. What does not take center stage in chapter 1 is the death of her husband. That makes sense, right? What takes center stage in the meaning is what Naomi says to her daughters-in-law. And then you get the last section, which really functions kind of as a conclusion, is when she gets back to Bethlehem. What the writer is going to center that last section on is what Naomi thinks about her situation. This is coming from Naomi. The writer is going to tell you this is how Naomi thinks about her situation. I need to add this note too. Sometimes we think good biblical characters are always right. It's not always true. Make sure you understand. Everything Ruth says is not true. If the writer says this is what Ruth says, don't take what Ruth says as what God says. If Naomi says this is what happened, take it as this is a person saying what happens who is not God. But if the narrator says this is what happens, that's God's voice. All right? So Naomi's not always right. Ruth is not always right. But the writer, the narrator, is always right. Are y'all with me? Because you might miss it, because Naomi's going to say some things that you're going to say, well, she said it. And then people say, they'll say, well, the Bible says. No, the Bible didn't say that. Ruth did. Naomi did. All right, are you with me? So let's look at that first section. Here is the setting, and it's important. It's important because it's going to create an atmosphere for the Jewish reader to understand, watch this, what God is doing. And one other note, will keep us on the right page. You are not going to hear the narrator tell you what God is doing. I love that part because that's how we live. We don't live with an insight on what God is doing, do we? We don't hear voices from heaven, right? Where God says, thus saith the Lord, George, show up at church on Sunday, right? You will not hear the writer tell you what God is doing, but you're gonna have a tendency to feel it, to draw some conclusions about what God is doing. And just like Naomi's gonna find out, we're usually wrong because we don't know him. We don't know his nature and his character, although this is written for that reason. So watch this. Here's the first section. Here's the setting. Now it came about in the days of the judges, he said. Now that's also informative as you first read it, because in the days of the judges, that's the days before there was a monarch in Israel, before there was a king, but it was also a terrible time for Israel in their relationship to God, because it was a time in which Israel, every man did what was right in his own eyes. That's what the writer of the book of Judges says. During that time, everybody was doing what they thought was right in their own eyes. So when the writer says this was the time that this happened, the reader right away hears, yeah, it may not go so well because that's when we were doing what we wanted to do. That there was a famine in the land. A famine in the land. Now, I've got to explain this to you. Because see, here's what the, how do I describe these folks without being too offensive? There are some guys who study the scripture in order to pound people over the head with it. There's some people who are naturally bent towards the legal aspects of our faith because it's easier to handle. It's easier to control you. Just tell me what he said to do. Y'all know what I mean? And then let me figure it out after that so that I can control. I know the narrative. And here's what some people will say. The Lord promised Israel that when there was a famine in the land, that when they were sinful and did not repent, he would send a famine. That's actually in the law. Are y'all with me? If there was sin in the land and they didn't repent, he would send a famine. And the preachers who preach Ruth and who like to do that kind of thing and like to center Naomi's behavior on her own actions will tell you that there's sin in Israel and that's why there's a famine. But here's the problem with that. The writer does not mention it. Either it's true and he says it's not necessary or it's not the point at all. Are y'all with me? There's a famine. And so it says, and a certain man of Bethlehem in Judah went to sojourn in the land of Moab. I love that the writer does this. Watch this. He says, he tells us initially in verse 1, it's a certain man. You know, when a writer says it's a certain man, what is he trying to say? It could have been anybody. He could have started with, there was a man named and he went to Moab, but he starts with, there was a certain man who went to Moab. He's going to tell us the man's name later, but he wants the reader to, first of all, identify with, it could have been any man. It wasn't that Elimelech is a particular kind of sinner and responder by fleeing Israel to Moab. It could have been any man. He does not want you to think that what Elimelech is doing is particular to Elimelech's faith or response to the famine. Are y'all with me? It's what any man would have done. Are y'all with me? But remember, when it says he left Bethlehem in Judah and he went to Moab, the writer knows the reader is going to hear, he went where? Oh, man. That's George, that would be akin to saying, Trevor, there was a famine in College Station, and so Trevor left College Station and he went to Austin. Some of y'all going to catch that on the way home. Oh, man. If y'all don't get that, ask me afterwards, I'll tell you. Or it would be, or it may be akin to, y'all will like this one. It may be akin to saying, there was a famine in Ohio, and so they moved to Michigan. Y'all get it now, don't you? So the reader right away hears, he went to Moab. Listen, I don't care how bad it gets in Bethlehem of Judah, you don't go to Moab. Listen, even if there's bread in Moab, you don't go to, that's the place you don't go to. And so the reader hears it right away. And the writer centers, this is going to be important. Ladies, y'all are going to like this. You're going to like this. Watch this, Frank. The writer is going to center as the subject of the first 3 verses, the man. He's going to call his name, verse number 2. The name of the man was Elimelech. Y'all see that? Elimelech. By the way, the name means my God is king. The writer's throwing some irony in there. His name is Elimelech, and the name of his wife is Naomi. Y'all see who's the subject? The subject is Elimelech, right? They mention Naomi as his wife. And so who's responsible for them going to Moab? Come on, y'all see it. Let the men say it. Who's responsible for them going to Moab, Dave? Elimelech. Because the writer tells you he decided to go to Moab in the beginning of the verse. And he takes his wife and his sons with him. That's going to become important in how she feels later, because it's probably not Naomi's idea to go to Moab. She's doing what a good wife does. She's following the knucklehead, the husband. She's withholding the I told you so. That if you had just listened to me. The name of the man was Elimelech, which, by the way, means my God is king. And the name of his wife is Naomi. And the names of their 2 sons was Mahlon and Chilion. And then the writer tells us again, they're Ephrathites from Bethlehem in Judah. Bethlehem in Judah. And now they entered the land of Moab, and they remained there. So what's the writer doing? What's he trying to point to? Watch. He mentions where they're from and where they're going twice. For what reason? To contrast where they're leaving and what they're leaving for. They're leaving Bethlehem to go to Moab. By the way, Bethlehem, the name Bethlehem is the house of bread. They're leaving the house of bread to go to Moab. It strikes the reader as, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. It almost brings an impending, oh, that's not going to go well. And you can almost sense it. You can feel it. The writer is setting the reader up, not for a productive time in Moab. It's an ominous omen that something bad is coming, because you don't leave Bethlehem to go to Moab. You just don't do it. And so that's the setting. As you read it, you ought to feel, uh-oh, it's not going to go well. Now, but watch this. There's some folks out there, as they read it, they're thinking, well, whatever does not go well, it's their own fault. It's their own fault, because you don't go to Moab. The Lord already said, don't go to Moab. Verse number 3 says, then Elimelech, now he is Naomi's husband. You'll see that? Then Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died. The writer just shifted from Elimelech being the center of the story to Naomi being the center. Y'all see it? This is not really about Elimelech. This is about Naomi. As a matter of fact, the book ought to be called Naomi and not Ruth. Watch this. So now Elimelech is Naomi's husband, and he died. He died, and she was left with her 2 sons. This is the tragedy. And if you thought that was bad, watch this. They took for themselves Moabite women, and the name of the one was Orpah, and the name of the other was Ruth. That was also a no-no according to the law. You don't give your sons to be married, your daughters to marry Moabite men, and you don't take Moabite women as your wives. You don't do that. That's a no-no. But they do. And watch this. And they live there about 10 years. They're married for 10 years. Don't let this escape you. They live there for 10 years and they don't have any children. There's a barrenness there that becomes important because the author is after a genealogy. And they don't have any children. And then it says, verse 5, then both Mahlon and Chilion also died. Now, I want you to get this. That's within a 10-year period. She loses her husband and her 2 sons, and the family she came with is all gone. She is alone except for her daughters-in-law. She went there with a full family, and all she got now is in-laws. And then the writer tries to make you connect with her situation, and it says, and the woman was bereft of her 2 children and her husband. She was deprived of them. She had them taken from her, the writer says. Make sure she didn't just, the writer wants you, they were taken. She lost something there. Her husband and her 2 sons. And she don't even have grandchildren. It's just her and her daughters-in-law. And you have to know culturally, a widow is in trouble if she has no male heir. She is destined for a life of poverty. She can't own land. She can't work land. She is in big trouble. And not only is she not able, she is a Jew living in Moab. She's in big trouble. And the writer wants you to feel that trouble. But watch this. Up to this point, all narrator, right? You've heard no dialogue. You haven't heard from Naomi. You haven't heard from Elimelech. You haven't heard from any of them. The writer is just set you up for it. You don't know anything up to this point about Naomi except she's in Moab and she's lost her family. You don't know what she's like, what she's thinking, what her faith is, what she thinks of the Lord. You have no idea, but the writer has set you up to understand it. Because it's in the Bible, right? It has to be about God, right? Can't just be a story about Naomi and what happens to her. It's written for our edification. It's written for us to understand God's redemptive plan. We know how the story is going to end, but how does God get us there is the question. And beginning at verse 6, that's where the story is going to take meat. So watch this. Naomi is going to get up to leave and go back to Bethlehem. George, here's what some people have told me about this. She went home after she hit rock bottom. That's how we do it, right? But that's when you read into the passage and not out of it. Because listen to the narrator tell you why she gets up to leave. Verse number 6. Then she arose with her daughters-in-law that she might return from the land of Moab, for she had heard in the land of Moab that the Lord had visited his people in giving them food. So was it rock bottom the reason she left? Why did she leave? Listen a little closer. Why did she leave? But when she leaves to go back to Judah, why does she go back? Because the famine's over. They were only there to live out the famine. When she heard the famine was over, well, now it's time to go home. She didn't go home because she said, I ain't got nothing left. I might as well go back. If she hadn't heard that the famine was ended, she probably would still be there. She's chasing the food. And by the way, our translators, just so that you understand, the word there that's translated food is actually the Hebrew word lechem, where you get the word Beth Lechem from. She heard in Moab that back in the house of bread, God had given bread. See, that's the writer's way of trying to tell you. You probably should have stayed in the house of bread, right? So that you didn't go to Moab to chase the bread. You should have stayed in the house of bread. But when she heard that the Lord had given bread back at the house of bread, she said, well, let me go back to the house of bread. She heard it. So she departed from the place where she was, and her 2 daughters-in-law with her. I found that interesting, right? Detail. Just reading carefully. The 3 of them set out to go back to Bethlehem, but somewhere along the line, Naomi is going to stop and say, wait a minute, y'all probably shouldn't come back with me. You know, they packed their bags to go to Bethlehem, but somewhere along the lines, Naomi is going to say, no, I probably should let y'all go back to Moab. Watch this. And here is where the story gets its significance. I'm at verse number 7. So she departed from the place where she was, and her 2 daughters-in-law with her, and they went on their way to return to the land of Judah. So it wasn't just her, it was them. And Naomi said to her daughters-in-law, go, return, each of you to her mother's house. Now, that's an unusual thing to say, because usually if you're going to return to a house, you return to your father's house. It's a clue as to what Naomi is probably thinking here. Generally, a widow returns to the safety of her father's house. Now, I don't know if the fathers were not there anymore, but she says, return to your mother's house. And watch this. And she is going to, this is where it becomes theologically interesting. She is going to bless them in the name of the Lord, in the name of Yahweh. Watch this. A Jew in Moab is going to request blessings on the Moabite women in the name of Israel's God, Yahweh. That's going to become important because you're trying to figure out what is Naomi thinking about all of this. Watch this. She says, may the Lord, and that word Lord there is actually the Lord's name. It's probably something like Yahweh. May Yahweh grant that you may find rest, she says to the 2 pagan women, each in the house of her husband. So she's asking that the Lord will allow them to find other husbands. Y'all see it? But don't miss it. In Yahweh's name. Naomi has spent at least the last 10 years in Moab, where the god of Moab is Chemosh, but she blesses them in the name of Yahweh. It's becoming theological now. Watch this. Verse number 9. And may Yahweh grant that you may find rest, each in the house of her husband. Then she kissed them. They lifted up their voices and they wept. Watch this. Grammar note. Is Naomi talking to them? Right now, the writer has not distinguished Orpah from Ruth at all. It's just Naomi and them. Stay with me. It's because Ruth has not taken center stage at all yet. They lifted up their voices and they wept. And they said to her, y'all see, this is now Orpah and Ruth as a collective. No individuality at all are going to then reply to Naomi. And they said to her, no, but we will surely return with you to your people. This is where it gets even more interesting. Your people. If this were in the Greek version of the Old Testament, it would be Gentiles, right? I'm sorry, not Gentiles, but your people, your ethnos. Don't miss this. This becomes important because modern American Christians don't quite get that what God is doing globally, he's doing ethnically. And it's all throughout the scripture. She says, we're going to go back with you to your people. Are y'all with me? This is going to become important. But Naomi said, return, my daughters. Why should you go with me? Have I yet sons in my womb, that they may be your husbands? Return, my daughters, go, for I am too old to have a husband. And if I said I had hope, y'all see, she says, I don't have that hope anymore. That hope is gone. If I said I had hope, if I should have a husband tonight and also bear sons, would you therefore wait until they were grown? Would you therefore refrain from marrying? Now, Naomi has a very Jewish understanding of what should happen in this situation. Modern American women don't get this, right? This was in Israel's law. If a woman marries a Jewish man and the Jewish man dies and not leaving offspring, right, she should marry his brother. Or his brother should take the wife so that she doesn't live that widow, destitute life. He should do it for his brother so that his brother's wife does not live a life of destitute life. It should be his duty to take care of his brother's wife. Are y'all with me? And so Naomi knows that, and she says, there are no brothers from Mahlon and Chilion for you to marry, and I'm too old to have any more. And even if I had one today, would you wait until they were old enough for you to marry? She's making a reasonable argument here. You shouldn't wait. Go on back to Moab and find a husband. She says. And then I want y'all to watch this very last verse that the writer puts in here, verse 13. That's going to become significant. It says, would you therefore refrain from marrying? No, my daughters, for it is, my translation says, harder for me than for you. I also have a note there. She says, I'm more bitter than you are. It's more bitter for me than it is for you. She says, I promise you, this is harder for me than it is for you. And then she says this, for, this is why it's bitter for her, the hand of the Lord has gone forth against me. Now let me ask y'all a question. It's okay if the answer's not right. Just answer honestly. Do you think the hand of the Lord is against her up to this point? You think the Lord's doing this to her? Well, they shouldn't have gone to Moab. Her son shouldn't have married those Moabite women. Is this the hand of the Lord? She says so. Is God punishing her for the decisions she's made? It's a great question. Listen, it's a question we deal with every day of our lives. Is this trouble my fault? Is God doing this to me? Listen, maybe I shouldn't have gone to Moab, and maybe this kind of happened, but I know I've got some part in me being in this bad spot, don't I? Is God doing this to me? Is he trying, the old folks used to say he's trying to get your attention. He's trying to tell you something. Is he? Let's keep reading. Well, what we do know is that the writer has made very clearly in Naomi's own words, she thinks the Lord's doing this to her. And she's bitter about it. And they lifted up their voices and they wept again. And Orpah kissed her mother-in-law. Watch this. But Ruth clung. First distinction between the two daughters-in-law, right? It is in their response to Naomi that Ruth distinguishes herself. Orpah is going to kiss her mother-in-law. She's going to say, that sounds right to me. I hate it. I'm going to kiss you, but I'm going back home. But Ruth clung to Naomi. And then Naomi says this to Ruth. Then she said, behold, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods. I find that just interesting. That's Naomi's syncretic sort of understanding of God. She says she's going back to her gods. Listen, if Ruth, let me put it in modern terms. If Naomi has a missionary mind, does she just dismiss them to go back to their gods? She says, no, it'd be better for y'all to go find a husband amongst that God who is not God. Go back to your people, find yourself a husband because, my God ain't taking care of me that good anyway. Y'all hear it? She's bitter, isn't she? She's saying, listen, your God, my God, it don't really matter. Go back, find you a husband. The best place to find one is with your people and your gods, not mine. There's a huge contrast there because y'all know the story, right? Ruth's going to find one amongst Israel's gods. We don't know what happened to Orpah, but we know that Naomi at this moment is probably not giving good advice. Go back, find a husband amongst your own people and your gods, she says. Return after your sister-in-law, she tells Ruth. And then right here, take center stage. Watch this. It's probably one of the most poetic sections of script in all of Scripture. Probably one of the most well-known symbols of God's own hesed, his loving kindness. That loyal love that God expects for his people to have, and it's on the lips of a Moabitess. But Ruth said, do not urge me to leave you or turn back. One of the longest sections of dialogue in the book. Or turn back from following you, for where you go, I will go. And where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people, my people. That's how it's actually written. My Bible says, your people shall be, and the shall be is in italics. It's stronger when she says, your people, my people. She says, where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. Thus may Yahweh do to me, and worse, if death parts you and me, she says. Watch this. The Moabitess evokes Yahweh's name. I love it. The Moabitess evokes Yahweh's name. Naomi is sending the daughter-in-law back to Chemosh, and the Moabitess says, no, I'm going to be with your God. And y'all can see, that's probably not because of Naomi's witness. Watch this. So where does she get this kind of chutzpah from? Where does she get this kind of loyalty from? Where's it coming from? Why would a Moabitess do something like this? Some people, she just loved her mother-in-law. All the daughter-in-laws know how divine that must be. Am I right? And then she says, thus may Yahweh do to me and worse, if anything but death parts you and me. When she saw that she was determined to go with her, she said no more to her. So here, watch this. Here's where the significance of this comes from. We know where it's going, right? Eventually, Ruth is going to have a child that becomes Naomi's heir, right? And Naomi's heir leads to the king. Not the king as in just royal, but the king from whom the Redeemer will come. In the redemptive plan, David is central not just because he's the king, but because the King of Kings will come from him. And watch this. So we know where the story is going, but the question is, how is it getting there? It's getting there because God is using Naomi and her tragedy to bring about his own redemptive plan. And she has no idea, and her faith is failing. because all she can see is her situation. She doesn't quite understand how her God operates. We get in those same situations where things are just bad and we think that God is doing this to me, and if not, he's not doing it. He surely could have stopped it, but he won't stop it because we're thinking, but what about me, God? And God is saying, you're in my redemptive plan. Just have faith in me. What I'm doing is bigger than what you're going through. And so then we get to the last section. Note this, it's a dialogue between Naomi. Ruth, again, fades into the background. She's not central here because that's not the point, right? And it's a dialogue between Naomi and the rest of the women in Bethlehem when she gets back. For what reason? The writer wants you to know how Naomi is thinking. He's going to tell us how she's thinking. So then, I'm at verse 19, last section. So they both went until they came to the house of bread. And when they had come to the house of bread, all the city was stirred because of them. Right? It's not easy to stir up folks, right? When they start talking. The whole city, it says. By the way, Bethlehem is not a big city. It's not a big place. It's a little town. Right? Any of y'all from a small town? Anybody? All y'all are city folk? Well, if you're ever from a small town, you know how it happens, right? Whatever goes on, everybody knows everybody's business. So when they show up in Bethlehem, the little bitty town, everybody starts talking. They start whispering about Naomi, right? But the writer tells us what they're whispering. And the women said, "Is this Naomi?" She's been gone for at least 10 years. Right? "Is this Naomi?" And then she said to them, "Don't call me Naomi," because Naomi means pleasant. She said, "Don't call me pleasant, call me Myra." And Myra means bitter. She said, "Don't call me Naomi. I am not pleasant, I am bitter." Y'all hear it? She's complaining. She says, "Don't call me Naomi, call me bitter." Why does she ask them to call her bitter? It's right there. Why does she do it? Because she says, "For the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me." Y'all see, she's blaming God. She says, "Because he has not been good to me. I'm bitter because he's been dealing bitterly with me." She says, "I went out full, but the Lord has brought me back empty." Who's she laying the blame on? She says, "He brought me back empty." "Why do you call me Naomi, since the Lord has witnessed against me? And the Almighty has afflicted me." See, that's a way of thinking when you don't know God. But see, that's a way of thinking when you really think God is really just about your obedience, that he has no real affection for sinful people, that God is somehow mechanical. Sin, consequences. Sin, wrath. Sin, consequences. He's always up there looking for the bad you do. And what she doesn't know is that God is making a global, universal, redemptive story that all the world will know one day through her. He wants the whole world to know that when I choose to redeem, I choose the most unlikely people to do it through, so you'll know it's me. I don't use the powerful, I don't use the beautiful, I don't use the pleasant, I use the bitter, rebellious, and the Moabites. And we need to understand it. We need to embrace it. Listen, if you are a part of the redemptive story, you are the bitter one. You are not the pleasant, you are not the beautiful. You are the bitter, rebellious ones who God chooses in all of his grace and mercy to redeem for his own purposes. Everybody in the body Everybody in the body. Everyone in the body is that kind of person. We don't have law-abiding people in the body of Christ. We don't have people who do it right. We don't have the upright moral people in the body. That's not who we are. Don't go out there and defend God's morality and his law to rebellious people. You're misrepresenting who you are and who we are. We are the Naomis. We're the people who go to Moab when we shouldn't. We are the people who marry the wrong people. We are the ones who finds ourselves in trouble, naturally breaking the law, and by the way, unrepentant about it, bitter about how we see ourselves, that God would punish me like this. You know, he knows my heart. He knows I try. I'm doing the best I can, and he's just out there with his thumb on my neck. And watch this. This is verse 22, last verse. This is the writer summing up the first section. So, see the resultive word, so, Naomi returned. She's back now. And with her, Ruth. The writer says, the Moabitess. Don't forget that. The one who shouldn't be here. She's back, bitter, with the Moabitess, the one who God says should not be allowed in the assembly of the Lord. I can just see it, George. Oh, it would be amazing. I could just see it. I could see if we were modern church folk, if we had been there, the church folk would have gotten riled up, Mimi, and they'd have said, you ain't bringing that woman in here, not into the Lord's house. The Lord done said. Oh, no, not in here. We don't do that in here. Yeah, she ain't dressed right. You know, he ain't bathed. We don't. Not in church. That's how we do it, isn't it? That's the people we are. Because watch this. We don't remember. We forget. We casually forget. We came in here stinking too. We were found stinking. We were redeemed from how we used to dress. Well, some of us. Some of us still dressing the way that the Lord found us. But the blood covers. See, this is just the nature of it. And listen, it's not just in Ruth's story. It's in all of them. It's in all of them. You know why Jesus told the story of the prodigal son? Because the prodigal is accepted and the one who never left is angry about it. The church folk are always angry about who comes into their church, how we're losing our morality, how we're not so upright anymore. We're so conservative when God is liberal with his love. He's liberal with his grace. He lavishes it on us. But we're conserving that grace only for those who are obedient or who will repent. Watch this. You won't find Naomi repenting once in the book. You know why? Because if we ever repent, it's because God moves us in our rebellion to repentance. It's his doing. I don't wake up one day and say, you know what, I've been pretty bad off. Lord, I'm sorry. He draws me by his Spirit to himself. He shares his grace with me. That's what makes it amazing. And then one day I wake up in all of that lavished grace and I say, God has been grateful to me. Lord, I am sorry. That's how it happens. But she has returned with her daughter-in-law, the Moabitess, who returned from the land of Moab. Don't forget where they came from. The place they shouldn't have been. And they came to Bethlehem, the house of bread, and they came at the beginning of the barley harvest. It's great. They came when it was time to harvest the bread. Now, that's just the first chapter. That's just the first chapter. These two women are still in big trouble. They're still in big trouble. They can't have any land. They don't have any barley, no bread, right? No means to getting it. And here's the great part of the redemptive story. But God is going to send a kinsman redeemer. I love it. A redeemer like them. A redeemer of their own kind. Y'all are missing it, right? This is the shadow of what Jesus will be the substance of. When we are unrepentant, bitter, in big trouble, he sends a redeemer of our same kind who will buy us, redeem us from the trouble we find ourselves in. And that's who our God is. He's always doing it through the worst kinds of people. Moabites. Watch this. Moabites. And watch this. All the people who haven't left, who stand around saying, Naomi, is that her? Ooh. In chapter 4, are going to say, God has blessed Naomi. And watch this. Let me show you this. It's stuck right in there, and I'm going to finish with it. In chapter 4, Dave read it, but y'all may have missed it. Look at this. Naomi took the child, it's verse 16, and laid him in her lap and became his nurse. The same women who said, is that Naomi? Are now saying, a son has been born to Ruth. Doesn't say Ruth, does it? Son's been born to Naomi. And then they give the genealogy of that Obed, who's going to become the father of Jesse, who's going to become the father of David. You see that through all of her misery that she thought the Lord was laying on her, the Lord was including her by his grace in his redemptive plan. And that's what he's doing to every one of us who are members of his redemptive plan. Your pain has a purpose for his glory. What you go through, he will reward you for. If you just remain faithful. Amen? Amen. Let's close in a word of prayer. Father, we are so grateful for the kinsman redeemer that you have sent to us. We're so grateful that you pursued us when we were in full-on rebellion, at war with you, bitter about our lives, knowing what we should have done that we have neglected or rebelled against. But we're so grateful, God, that your grace, as amazing as it is, has reached us. And it's reached us in some of the most vile of places, in the Moabs of our life, that you have come and you've rescued us through a kinsman redeemer, the Lord Jesus Christ. Help us, Father, to internalize who we were and what you have done, and love you for how much we have been forgiven, so that we become forgivers too. People of grace, a people who forgive others as we have been forgiven, so that your name will be glorified in all of the earth. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.